guys? It's Shannon, the Johnny from the Trinisphere, where Timmy, Johnny, and Spike battle over all things EDH, and I'm coming to you with a deck tech based off of Yannik and Nikara, and I call this Yannik FLICKERFORCE. Yannik and Nikara are two of the partners from the recent Commander 2020 Precons that just came out, and we haven't been able to produce a lot of deck techs and gameplays, if you've noticed recently, because of course the gameplays are a lot harder to pull off now that we're dealing with this pandemic, but the deck techs have also fallen to the wayside because we're in the midst of our Commander 2020 Precon League, this annual Commander League that we play whenever a Precon set comes out. In this league, we start with the decks out the box, changing slowly over time, 5 cards from week to week, the Precons into fully powered EDH decks. So we've been doing that for the last month plus, and I've been playing Yannik and Nikara in that league. And while I'm pivoting off of these two and moving on to something else for the final stretch of league, I really enjoyed playing them enough, so much that I wanted to build a fully powered list to see, or at least a fully evolved list, maybe not fully powered. I'm not gonna put a couple $1,000s into this list. I'm gonna keep it reasonable, but I really wanted to see what the final iteration of this list could have looked like. So without further ado, let's talk about Yannik and Nikara, or Yan and Nick. Nick, or Nikara Lair Scavenger, a 3-mana mono black 2/2 with Menace that says whenever another creature you control leaves the battlefield, if it had 1 or more counters on it, you draw a card and lose a life. So this is kind of like Dark Prophecy, the 3-mana enchantment that says whenever a creature you control dies, you lose life and draw a card, but it's also triggered off of leave the battlefield, not just die. So this works a lot better with exiling effects, bouncing effects, that kind of stuff. Next up, we'll talk about Yannik, the Selesnya colored 4-mana 3/3 vigilant hyena beast with whenever I enter the battlefield, exile another creature you control until Yannik leaves the battlefield. When you do, distribute X +1/+1 counters among any number of target creatures, where X is that exiled creature's power. So it's kind of like a Fiend Hunter that can only hit our creatures. However, it gives us +1/+1 counters equal to the exiled creature's power. So that allows us to kind of shuffle around power levels, as well as to re-trigger ETB effects repeatedly. And that's what we're going to focus on, the fact that we have a Fiend Hunter in our command zone. So let's talk about the first combo. I call this the Yan Guide combo, and that uses Yannik, Scavenging Sentinel, along with Karmic Guide, the 5-mana 2/2 Angel Spirit with Flying, Prot Black, and Echo 5. When Karmic Guide enters the battlefield, return target creature card from our graveyard to the battlefield. So these two work really well together in conjunction with a sack outlet. Basically what you do is you have Karmic Guide in play, and you cast Yannik, or you put Yannik, Scavenging Sentinel, into play, and then you exile Karmic Guide. Now, Karmic Guide is exiled underneath Yannik. If you sacrifice Yannik to any other sack effect, it puts Karmic Guide back into play, re-triggering Karmic Guide's enter the battlefield of trigger. Instead of putting Yannik in the command zone, you put Yannik in the graveyard. And that means Karmic Guide, when it enters the battlefield, it triggers. You can choose Yannik out of your graveyard to be put back into play through Karmic Guide. And now you're back to square one. Yannick's entering the battlefield. You can choose Karmic Guide to be exiled, and you've netted an ETB event, you've netted a LTB event, and you've netted 2 +1/+1 counters. And you can loop this infinitely so long as your sack outlet is a solid 0-mana, no tapping kind of sack outlet. One of those nice repeatable ones, which we will be talking about in a little bit here. So you can use the +1/+1 counters generated through Yannik and the LTBs and the ETBs to great effect. Now, one of the other great ways to use the +1/+1 counters and LTBs is the other commander, Nikara Lair Scavenger. This one says whenever Yannik leaves the battlefield, if it had a +1/+1 counter on it, which it can put on itself while we're looping, you get to draw a card and lose a life. So you can pretty much use this to dig really deep into your deck for other combo pieces. You can dig, 39 cards if you're at 40 life. And then once you've reached the combo pieces that you need to win the game, you can just sack Nikara to your sack outlet, so you no longer lose life and draw cards as you're looping. And then you can work on with other pieces at that point to continue looping to win the game. Another way to offset that life loss is Essence Warden, which we'll be running in here. But let's talk about some of the ways that we can win once we start digging with this loop. We can use cards like Bramblewood Paragon and Pride Malkin. Both of these cards give creatures with +1/+1 counters on them trample. So what we can do is, as we're looping, we can pile all of our infinite number of +1/+1 counters onto Nikara, so that Nikara is a menacing, infinitely large, trampling creature. There's no way for them to block that effectively, and they'll just die from that one shot. Additionally, we can use Corpse Knight, the 2-mana 2/2 that says whenever another creature enters the battlefield under our control, each opponent loses 1 life. So this is kind of like a Zulaport Cutthroat, but it triggers off of ETBs instead of dies. So this is useful for when we're looping. Karmic Guide is not dying, it's being exiled and put back into play. But also this deck did originally run kind of a food chain combo, so Corpse Knight works a lot better with those combos as opposed to Zulaport Cutthroat, which requires creatures dying. And lastly, I'll talk about Gyre Sage, which is a 2-mana 1/2 with Evolve, which means if a creature bigger and power or toughness than it enters the battlefield under control, we can put a +1/+1 counter on Gyro Sage. But also Gyro Sage says tap to add a green to our pool for each +1/+1 counter on me. So this allows us to put an infinite number of +1/+1 counters on Gyro Sage and then tap it to just add an infinite amount of green to our mana pool. So this is a way to turn the +1/+1 counters through the Yan Guide loop into infinite green mana. The next combo I want to talk about is the LARK Guide loop, as I call it, and that's Revelark and Karmic Guide. This is a pretty classic combo. Revelark is a 5-mana 4/3 flying elemental that says when I leave the battlefield, return up to 2 creature cards with power 2 or less from the graveyard to the battlefield. What do you know? Karmic Guide has power 2. So Revelark can return Karmic Guide to the battlefield. Karmic Guide can return Revelark to the battlefield. Both of those loop infinitely, but also Revelark brings 2 bodies. It actually brings Karmic Guide plus another creature with power 2 or less from graveyard to the battlefield. So of course we can use Acidic Slime, a kind of a classic one. This 5-mana 2/2 is a Death Toucher that says when I ETB, I destroy artifact, enchantment, or land. So we can use this in the LARK Guide loop to destroy all lands. We can destroy all of our opponent's lands as we loop Revelark and Karmic Guide infinitely. And that usually causes our opponents to concede, and usually with an epic amount of salt, but that is a way we can win with this loop. But we can use some other ones that may be less salty, including Death Cultist, and Triskelion, and Wall of Limbs. I love some of these jankier cards. I love winning games with Death Cultist because it's such an unassuming creature. For a single black, you get a 1/1 that can sack itself to drain an opponent from 1 life. That is, that opponent loses 1 life and you gain 1 life. With the LARK Guide combo, we can loop Death Cultist and put it into play infinite number of times and sack it an infinite number of times to drain our opponents. Triskelion similarly is a creature with only 1 power, so Revelark can put it back into play from graveyard. And this is kind of like our budget and or more effective in this deck, Walking Ballista. Because Walking Ballista, if we were to put it into play from Revelark, would be a 0/0 and would die immediately. Triskelion is a 1/1 that comes into play and then puts 3 +1/+1 counters on itself. So this is really useful. It also works well with the other combo, the Yan Guide combo. If Triskellion's in play, we can just dump an infinite number of +1/+1 counters on Triskelion and then shoot everyone to death. And then similarly, Wall of Limbs is a kind of a fun, this is my Johnny pick for the deck, a card that people are going to have to be like, what does that do? I've never heard of that before. This 3-mana 0/3 zombie wall has Defender, of course, and it says whenever you gain life, put a +1/+1 counter on me. And then for 7 mana and sack me, target player loses X life, or X is my power. So once again, this is another really funny fling on a body. If you were going to be a little more competitive, a little more along the mainstream, you could probably use like Gerard here, but I would rather just use Wall of Limbs to have people like, I get off when people have to read my cards. So this is definitely going to be the one. This basically, you put an infinite number of +1/+1 counters on it, then you just fling it at somebody, you throw it at somebody's face and they die. We're also going to run Safi Eriksdotter. It's kind of like another Karmic Guide in this loop. This 2-mana 2/2 can be returned to play by Revelark and has an ability that says sack me to put a delayed effect into play that says whenever target creature is put into the graveyard from the battlefield this turn, return that to the battlefield. So we could sack Safi Eriksdotter to put that shield onto Revelark that automatically resurrects Revelark, and then we just sack Revelark and put Safi Eriksdotter plus another creature back into play. So another way to loop similarly to Karmic Guide. Some other fun cards that we can use in the LARK Guide loop include Blood Pet, Elvish Visionary, Spore Frog, and Wall of Roots. Blood Pet and Wall of Roots are 2 kind of mana generators. Now, these are interesting because they both can be used an infinite number of times while we're looping. Blood Pet sacrifices itself to add a black to our pool, whereas Wall of Roots says just put a negative counter on me, a -0, -1 counter on me to add a green to the mana pool. So both of these effectively don't have summoning sickness. We can use them over and over and over and over again as we're looping to generate infinite mana. Elvish Visionary just gives us a way to draw our entire deck, and Spore Frog gives us a repeatable fog that we can use to prevent opponents from beating us to death. Wall of Roots also has that added benefit of triggering Nikara, Lair Scavenger. It does have a counter on it when it dies and we loop, so Nikara can draw us cards through Wall of Roots as well. Let's talk about some of the engines, the sack engines that we use to sack stuff. So we're going to run all of the altars, the traditional Altar of Dementia, Ashnod's Altar, and Phyrexian Altar. So these ones are all very good, and unfortunately the best one is of course the most expensive one. Phyrexian Altar at $50 right now at the time of this recording allows us to sack any creature to add 1 mana of any color to our mana pool. This is excellent, of course, with this deck. It allows us to generate infinite mana in addition to all the things we've talked about so far. The less superior Ashnod's Altar adds double colorless to our pool. Now, in some decks that's a lot better because you're adding twice as much mana to the mana pool, but in this one, you don't have a whole lot of colorless outlets here. So this is kind of just it's a subpar thing. Maybe if we can dig for Triskelion, or we're gonna have a lot of mana rocks in here. So if you're able to generate infinite colorless mana and draw your entire deck, in theory, you will be able to use that colorless mana to cast mana rocks and then start filtering that colorless mana into colors to pull off the win. And lastly, Altar of Dementia just mills target player whenever we sack stuff. So we can use this to set up our graveyard, but mainly we're gonna use this to infinitely mill out all of our opponents so that they die on the draw step. We're also gonna run Carrion Feeder, Viscera Seer, and Woe Strider, some more classic ones. These don't really add a whole lot more to the combo. Carrion Feeder doesn't really do much in the way of this combo, but it is a 1 mana 1/1, so it's an easy sack outlet to have, and it's recurable in case a lot of our sack engines get blown out early. And then Viscera Seer and Woe Strider are very similar creatures, allows us to scry one. So if we're doing that infinitely, we can set up the perfect top deck. Also, when Nikara is drawing us cards and we're losing life, Viscera Seer and Woe Strider help us dig a little bit extra deeper. We can just scry and bottom cards before Nikara loses a life and draws us a card. So we can kind of dig twice as deep to try and find those combo pieces. So that's the meat of the deck. Let's talk about the veggies, the ramp and the removal, and the draw here. So we have quite a bit of ramp broken into 2 categories. We have rocks, like I mentioned earlier, but we also have a lot of creatures as well. For creatures, we have Abzan's Pilgrim, Birds of Paradise, Devoted Druid, and Elves of Deep Shadow. So we have some green 1-drops that can produce other colors other than green. And we have Devoted Druid, which can produce green and can also put a -1/-1 counter on itself to untap itself. So this one, interesting, works well with Nikara. When it does die, it does draw us a card as well when Nikara is in play. So this one's kind of a cool add as well. I love getting to play this whenever possible. We're also going to run Elvish Mystic, Fyndhorn Elves, Llanowar Elves, and Sakura Tribe Elder, or Steve. So we're going to run the rest of the 1-drop mana generators. So we have a lot of early game ramping going on. And then we have Steve. It's a ramping growth on a body. So this works also well with the Lark Guide combo because we can recur Sakura Tribe Elder infinitely, sack Sakura Tribe Elder to ramping growth infinitely. So we can put every basic in our deck into play tapped when we're doing that loop. And that helps filter our draws so that Nikara doesn't kill us as quickly by drawing dead cards. But also, if we're not going to win that turn, we can definitely untap with like 20 plus mana easily. For rocks, we're going to run all the signets: Arcane, Golgari, Orzhov, and Selesnya signets. And then we're also going to run Soul Ring. And of course, we're running all these signets because, like I said before, once you start to go infinite with Ashnod's Altar, you need these signets to be able to filter that infinite colorless mana into a few colors just to pull off the win right then and there. For removal, we have a good number of hits any kind of permanent removal, including Beast Within, Generous Gift, and Mythos of Nethroi. Now, this Mythos unfortunately does not hit lands, but the first 2 do, so you can break up people when they start using like their Gaia's Cradle to show off their money or something like that. And Mythos also is another one of these cards that can kind of deal with any combo piece if need be. Additionally, we're going to run Force of Vigor, a fun 0-cost way to disrupt combos. And then we're going to run Swords to Plowshares and Tragic Arrogance to deal with anyone trying to kill us. For creature-based removal, we're going to run a couple of creature-based removal options that can be fed into that Lark Guide combo to just be reiterated infinitely. We're going to run Knight of Autumn, Ravenous Chupacabra, Reclamation Sage, and Remorseful Cleric. All of these have power 2 or less, so they can be recurred through the Lark Guide loop. We're also going to run Deathbright Shaman. So we have a couple of ways to break up people's graveyards. So, you know, if we're Altar of Dementia milling somebody and they're like, oh, I'm really excited about that because I'm a dredge deck, you'd be like, all right, let me just go find my Remorseful Cleric and exile your graveyard right here and there. Now, Knight of Autumn also is really good. It's a souped up Reclamation Sage. You can either naturalize a target, or you can put +1/+1 counters on it, or gain 4 life. So if you're looping this infinitely, you can gain infinite life. Otherwise, you can put +1/+1 counters on it and then sack it and trigger Nikara to draw a card. So this one has a little bit of versatility that hits a lot of the different things that we want to be doing here. For draw effects, we have Cling to Dust, Elemental Bond, Fecundity, and Moldervine Reclamation. So a lot of these are just enchantments that trigger off of deaths and or ETBs. So something that we can really repeat a bunch of times while we're looping and draw a ton of cards. These really can replace Nikara while we're looping so that we don't have to lose life, and some of them just supplement that. Cling to Dust is a cool one that one of my CDH buddies kind of turned me on to. This 1-mana instant says exile a card from a graveyard. If it's a creature, gain 3, otherwise draw a card. So it's basically a black cantrip that has escape for 4, so you can cantrip this out of your graveyard while still managing to snipe specific combo pieces out of other people's graveyards. We're also going to run Village Rites as a new M21 Altar's Reap. This is 1-mana instant says sack a creature to draw 2 cards. We're also going to run a few tutors in here because of course this deck requires very specific pieces to pull off. We're going to run Aldamari's Call, Recruiter of the Guard, and Shared Summons. You can definitely jam a whole lot of money into this category. When I was competing in the league, I was running Vampiric Tutor, Worldly Tutor, Demonic Tutor, all those things to make this deck run a lot more consistently, but I really wanted to bring this down to more reasonable price range. So right now it's sitting at around $200, and definitely a lot of the money was removed from this category. So I do like Shared Summons, though I think this one's a little more powerful than people give it credit for because it allows you to tutor up 2 creatures at instant speed, which means even though you have to reveal that you're pulling out combo pieces from your deck and about to combo off, you did it at the end of their turn, so they have the smallest window of opportunity in order to realize that you're about to win the game. All right, so let's move on to the last 2 categories, which include Recursion and Protection. For Recursion, we have Eternal Witness, Phyrexian Delver, and Rift Sweeper. Rift Sweeper, one of those really annoying to play cards, but you know, whatever. Also, I used to run this when I was running Food Chain as well, but Rift Sweeper allows us to pull a card from exile and shuffle it back into our deck. So if somebody does stop us from comboing off with a Source to Plowshares and like exiles a Karmic Guide or something like that, we can use Rift Sweeper to go and get it back if need be. Phyrexian Delver does a really bad impression of Karmic Guide. It's also a 5-mana creature with 2 toughness, and it does put a creature from graveyard back into play, but we lose life equal to the CMC of that creature. So this can quickly kill us, like really rapidly. This is like not something that we really want to focus on too much, but we can use it in a pinch to try and kickstart that combo if they've disrupted it once before. And of course, Ewit helps us get our tutors back so we can go tutor a second time. For protection, we're going to be a little more reactive instead of proactive as a combo player. We want to make sure that we can pull off our combo. So we're going to use Benevolent Bodyguard, Docent of Falling Leaf, Inspiring Call, and Selfless Savior. 2 of those cards help us give specific creature we control protection or indestructible, whereas Docent just shuts off our opponents during our turn. They can't do anything during our turn. And then Aspiring Call is kind of like our cheap version of Flawless Maneuver. It allows us to give all of our creatures indestructible. And then it also has that added benefit of drawing cards if they have +1/+1 counters. Real quick, I'll scan through the mana base for some call outs here. We are going to run the Mosswort Bridge in here because, of course, with the Yannik loop, we can create a creature of infinite size. So the Mosswort Bridge is basically just a free spell cast. We're also going to run Murmuring Bosk. The rest of our mana base is just your classic budget mana base. It runs things like Sungrass Prairie, Temple of Malady, and Llanowar Waste. And we run 37 lands in this deck. It could probably be cut down, especially because we have so many mana dorks and not a whole lot of draw. But that's a wrap for the Yannik FLICKERFORCE. Let me know what you think. Is this something that you could see yourself playing as a Johnny? Is it using some of those obscure cards in order to pull off wins? You know, the LARK Guide combo is not super obscure, but it's been a long time since I played with it, so I thought I'd brush it off. All right, that's a wrap. We will be putting out more deck techs going forward as we're starting to end Commander Precon League. I'll let you know how it is going. Right now, I do believe Juan the Timmy is in the lead of our 12-person league that involves quite a few spikes, so it's kind of funny that our resident Timmy is absolutely crushing people with Drina Kondo Mardu deck list. All right, until next time, great minds brew alike.